Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the League of Women Voters Jacksonville First Coast Speaker Series for the month of October. Not sure how we got to October as fast as we did, but here we are. So before we begin our program, I'll ask that if you have any questions for our presenters today, that you put them in the chat. I'm also going to ask, out of respect for our presenters, that you keep yourself muted, and we'll be doing the same here in the background. So we're going to hear from our speakers. I'll introduce them here in just a moment. They'll both have about 20 minutes each to share with you some of their personal stories from pre-Roe v. Wade. And then we'll have about 10 minutes at the end to really talk about what's going on here locally, some opportunities that we're having here at the League of Women Voters. So again, please mute yourself. If you have any questions, please place those in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can during our presentation. So our first speaker this afternoon is Toni Pelt. And although she is retired from her first career as a travel agent, she stays very busy, as you'll hear in just a moment. She currently serves as the vice president of her National Organization for Women chapter. Most recently, she served as the president for the National Organization for Women. She served on the board of the National Organization for Women as the Southeast Regional Director and is Florida Now's president and treasurer. As a congressional lobbyist, she organized and directed one of the first public policy offices of the secular humanist movement in Washington, D.C. Her key focus during her working career was on women's rights, LGBTQ plus issues, the importance of science to the well-being of the nation, on the validity of separation of religion and government, and the defense of democracy and secularism. And with that, Toni, I give you the Zoom floor and I welcome you to the League of Women Voters. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction. This is the story of why I do this work. So my attitudes were profoundly influenced during my childhood by the trauma the women in my family experienced during pregnancy because of the interference of the state and the church. I was 7 years old when my mom delivered her fourth child. It was a very tense time in our home. Mom's life was endangered by her pregnancy. She had been told by her doctors after the delivery of her second child that they could not guarantee her health or her life if she had any more children. But my mom had converted to Catholicism, one of the prices of marriage demanded by the church, because it was the religion of my father's family. Birth control was out of the question. Worried about the life of their patient, her doctors finally decided to take steps to safeguard my mother's life by sterilizing her after the delivery of her fourth child. In those days, a woman could only be sterilized immediately after a delivery and only if the hospital board and the state of Ohio gave their approval. 2 doctors had to appear before the board and certify her condition. My dad then had to appear before a state judge with the hospital's representative to seek the permission for the surgery. All this while my mom was being rolled into the delivery room. There was no chance that my dad would have enough time to get to the delivery room to support mom and be a part of the birth of their child. I will never forget thinking my mother's life was the most important thing in the world. I was only 7 years old and I needed my mom, and I knew it was wrong for the church and state to have a say in our family affairs. When I was in high school, I saw my girlfriends disappear. We didn't know at the time they were being whisked away in the night because they were pregnant and their families made them give their babies up for adoption. They were shamed and shunned by family members. The fathers stayed in school as if nothing happened, and it didn't for them. Many of my friends suffered for years not knowing what happened to their children. Once I graduated from high school, I moved to Los Angeles to live with 2 of my friends who were pregnant and unmarried to support them. Their families had enough money to send them far away from Ohio to live in an apartment. But the letters they received from their families during their pregnancies were ugly and they were heartbreaking. They delivered their children, had them taken away for adoption at their parents' insistence, and flew home. I knew it was wrong. This was in 1966. Other options, such as marrying outside of one's faith or legal abortion, were not acceptable or allowed by society at the time. I found myself pregnant when I was 21 in 1969. One of my best friends gave me a phone number provided to her by her girlfriend's dad, a doctor. She had suffered through an illegal abortion the year before. It was no easy task for a young woman, to find the $400 cost of an abortion and drive across town alone to the other side in Cleveland to an unfamiliar neighborhood. A woman dressed as a nurse took me upstairs into a bedroom in her home and had me undress, lie down on a bed, and inserted a tube into my cervix and uterus. On my way home, a driver ran a red light and broadsided my car. I was thrown out of the car, smashing my head against the curb as the car wrapped around a telephone pole. Although I was badly injured, I refused to go in an ambulance to the hospital because I was terrified of being arrested. Later that night, I realized the tube had dislodged. The accident ended the attempted abortion. I landed in the hospital the next day, ill, in pain, confused, and frightened. Once out of the hospital, desperate, I made contact with the abortionist and was sent to an apartment. Two women there had me climb into a bathtub of very hot water and kept pouring in more hot water that they were boiling on the stove. It's all that I can remember, or perhaps choose to remember, from that horrible night. I did abort a few days later alone in my apartment in the bathroom toilet. It was relatively easy, just blood and tissue. However, I've never taken a bath again. I was just so relieved it was over. A few months later, I received a phone call. The young woman on the other end was asking for the phone number of an abortionist. She had got my name at one of the nightclubs we frequented to dance. She sounded so young and frightened. I asked her to come to my apartment to talk it over. I wanted to be sure she knew what she was doing. It is only now, as I write this, that I wonder why I took such a huge risk. At the time, I never even thought about it. I gave her the nurse's number I had. Shortly afterwards, I was arrested for aiding and abetting an illegal abortion, a felony charge at that time. The young woman had wound up in the hospital. Intimidated by police, she had told them what she remembered of me. The police appeared at my place of employment and tried to browbeat me into giving up the name of the abortionist. They came on 2 separate occasions. Then one snowy, cold night at 10 in the evening, near the end of my shift at the Cleveland Hopkins Airport, they came a 3rd night. When I still refused to give them any information, they arrested me. I was jailed overnight on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Their plan was to keep me in jail until Monday, so I would cave in and give them the name and details of the abortionist. Luckily, one of my roommates at the time contacted my folks, who knew a judge from the old neighborhood. He came to court Thanksgiving morning to set bail and free me. When I appeared at the trial weeks later, the judge ruled the charge aborted and found me innocent. Why? Because an incorrect name was listed on the arrest warrant. My record was purged. When I was in my 20s, I had my only child. During the pregnancy, I had a life-threatening complication. After my daughter was born, it was discovered I had cancer. There was a long history in my family of women dying from cancer in their 20s if they did not have their uterus removed. The doctor would not give me the operation I needed, a hysterectomy, because I was only 26, and afterwards I would no longer be able to bear children. My doctor used a procedure, cauterization, repeatedly, that caused me splitting headaches and did nothing to stop the advance of the disease. The prolonged delay in proper treatment endangered my life. I was in a panic. I brought my life partner with me to convince the doctor we didn't want any more children. My mother talked to the doctor. Finally, my grandmother flew in from Ohio and went with me to convince him. She asked the doctor how many children he had. He answered 12. She asked his religion. He was a Catholic. My grandmother promptly took me to a Jewish doctor who operated on me within 4 weeks. I almost died because my doctor refused to honor my wishes and beliefs because he did not consider my life as important as his religious and personal beliefs. Interwoven throughout my own experiences are those of the women I have had the privilege of knowing throughout my life's journey. Women I went to school with, worked with, traveled with, and met on trips in foreign countries. We women suffer much the same consequences of the draconian patriarchal laws that are enforced in our societies worldwide. My life's work has been defined by these experiences. I was meant to work for women's rights. My life's journey was set on this road when I was 7 years old. I'm in my 70s now, and I have every intention of continuing to stand up and speak out for a woman's right to self-autonomy until the day the women are able to make the best decisions for themselves without interference from religion or government. Thanks for your listening to my story.
Toni,
Wow.
I just unmuted. I'm just, oh my gosh, you have survived so much, you and your family, and I am in awe of your strength. I don't have any questions in the chat right now, and we're not a huge group. So if anybody wants to raise their hand virtually or physically, if you have a question for Toni, feel free to, and we'll make certain you're unmuted to ask a question. Linnell, I heard you.
Yeah, so wow, a couple of things going on there. Law enforcement, the law working against you, and then a person's faith actually coming into play with your healthcare decisions. Not so dissimilar to some of the things that we're actually experiencing right now. That a lot of people see reproductive health and justice as healthcare, and that you should be able to make these decisions for yourself with your medical provider. And yet here you had a medical provider who actually put you in harm's way. It's sad to hear that then, and it's sad to know that that still happens now.
Yeah, I think that my story, it's just a cautionary tale. I mean, we are there again. And it reminds me of what's happening in Iran right now with the revolution over there. Even the high school young girls are coming out because they know we're human beings. We have a right to care for ourselves in the way that we think is best.
Yeah, so I'm glad that your grandmother had the foresight to actually come out and really, nowadays we would call it a second opinion. But she had the foresight to say, just because this doctor is telling you this now and here, based on his religion, doesn't mean that this is right for you. So I'm thankful that she did that. And it's also sad that I think you said you took your life partner with you to see your doctor to actually kind of reinforce and validate the fact that you weren't seeking to have more children just so you could get the medical procedure and care that you needed and deserved.
Yeah, it was really sad. And I took my mom with me. My mom explained the situation to him, but he just didn't care. He just literally did not care about me. And that's what we hear over and over again with the current conversations, that the politicians that are in charge of these decisions, they don't care about women. They don't care if women die. They say it right up front. That's just the way our God thinks it should be. That's just what she'll deserve if she dies. I mean, I just can't believe that people want them to be in power.
But I have a hunch that that most doctors are not like that now, or at least more doctors are not like that. That in the last 50 years, first of all, women will stand up for their rights in a way they didn't even know how to in the 50s and 60s. And that, when I first started getting involved, that was before NOW existed. The empowerment of women in the last 50 years has changed things dramatically. Whatever we're going through now is not what we were going through in 1965 or 68 or 69 or 70.
Right. And I remember, my cousin reminded me of this just last week. We, at that time, we believed that God's doctors were gods. Whatever they said, that is just the way it had to be. And so my grandmother was a very religious person. She was a Lutheran. And but I think that I got my strength and my power to speak out from her as an example. I mean, she was not having it. That's why she flew down. She was really upset about it. I'm lucky. I'm just lucky that I've had strong women in my family.
Yeah, you also mentioned, you said that the two women, I think you said were from Ohio, that went to LA to, I guess, give forced birth.
Yeah.
Not an attractive word there, but it's kind of interesting, some of the things that we're, anticipating right now for abortion care is that we will have to help women migrate from states and areas where they're prohibited from getting the health care that they want to pursue to other places just so they can seek abortion care.
Well, one was from Cleveland, one was from Cincinnati, and we were just close friends. And I didn't say in my talk, but I had one aunt that died from an illegal abortion. And we were told, I was young then, I was about 11 or 12 years old, and we were told that she died. First, we were told she died from eating ice. And interestingly enough, I was talking to another woman a couple of years ago, and she said she was told that a member of her family died from eating ice. So I don't know if that was like a common thing back then or whatever. But it turns out that my aunt had an illegal abortion. She was bleeding. They took her to the hospital, and they gave her the wrong blood type, and that's what she died from. And then I had another aunt, actually her sister, who had an illegal abortion, who really was butchered, and she could never have children. And it was really odd because I thought at the time, she spent her life with dolls. She had, I don't know if you remember when they came out with dolls that walked and talked. They were pretty tall. She had a lot of dolls in her life, and she took care of everybody else's children. It was sad. It's sad what happens to women.
We don't have any immediate questions for Toni. I am going to go ahead and introduce Christopher and have him speak, and then we'll entertain questions for Christopher as well as Toni. I know some of you are probably processing some of the very personal and intimate things that she shared with us. And it's, I appreciate you being bold enough to continue to tell your story and tell the stories of others that you've supported and helped over the years. But it's a lot. And I know for some of us, we probably had loved ones, family members, close friends that have probably had some of those same experiences. So this becomes very personal to a lot of us. So I thank you for that. And I'll ask you to stay with us, Toni, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce Christopher. So our next speaker is a fellow Legal Women Voters member, Reverend Christopher Martin. So Christopher is a retired Episcopal priest, married to Sandy Martin, our former treasurer. She's very active in the League of Women Voters since 2015. And as a young priest, new to Jacksonville in 1969, he met a Presbyterian minister named Reverend Marvin Lutz. Together, they formed a local chapter of Clergy Consultation Service, which offered abortion counseling and referrals for women in need. So after Roe v. Wade, Reverend Martin Lutz and Dr. Max Super founded the Jacksonville Women's Center for Reproductive Health, the first nonprofit freestanding abortion clinic in Florida. Soon after, Christopher joined the board of directors of the center, and then Christopher later became the chairman of the board of Planned Parenthood of North Florida. He became the chairman of the board in 2005. And although retired from his position, he still supports and works for reproductive health and freedom for women, and he is the father of 2 daughters. So with that, Christopher, I will let you have the Zoom floor.
And that last line I put that in there so you know why I care about women's issues. And I've noticed over the years, if you see men who are maybe in the right spot with women's issues and care about these things, often, the majority of the time, they are the father of daughters. It changes your whole perspective in a way that being the father of sons doesn't happen so much. In preparing for this, it was like opening up the Pandora's box of my memory. And I've got 4 books, most of which have not been fully read about abortion. One that's important is Abortion Counseling and Social Change, which I should have figured out a way to put this on the screen. But anyway, it was written by Arlene Carmen and Howard Moody. And Howard Moody was the person that started Clergy Consultation Service. And it gives a little bit of history. And now I don't know, and I haven't heard anybody talk about it, but in the 60s, of course, there was so much going on with social change. But in the 60s, all over the country, people were beginning to look at the situations that, like Toni has talked about, and said, you know, this isn't right, we've got to do something. And it was, there was a movement that began to somehow change the laws about abortion. And in 1967, Howard Moody, who was the pastor of Judson Memorial Church and had been for about 10 years, his administrative secretary, who's now the administrator of that church, well, maybe not now, but when they wrote the book, Arlene Carmen came to him with a situation about a woman in the need of an abortion and all the stuff. And he got very involved in it and recruited other clergy in New York to begin to deal with this issue. I moved to Jacksonville in 1969, and Marvin Lutz had already begun looking about what was being done with clergy consultation in Florida, at least in 69, in the early 70s. And there were two groups in Florida. One was based at FSU, chaplain's office, and the other was based in Southwest Florida. I'm not sure where. And what was interesting is that both of these organizations, they were just clergy consultation, you know, Tallahassee or whatever, were kind of underground. And Marvin was determined to not be underground, and there was a lot of strife among the different groups. And finally, Howard Moody came in and said, look, y'all are independent. You can do it the best way you feel to do in your area. And we went, Marvin and I, a friend introduced us. We, before we did anything, went and talked to Ed Austin, the state attorney, and said what we wanted to do about counseling. And did he have any problem with it? And he didn't have any problem with it. He said, you know, I don't see anything that's illegal about you counseling women and giving them help. And so we were totally public. And we, by the middle of 1970, well, we started in 70, we formed in the fall of 70. And then by 1971, we had almost 40 lay people and clergy, 40 counselors that worked for us. We just started talking to clergy that we knew, and if I read a list, you know, the people, I could read a list of the names because they most have died. But Sidney Lefkowitz, who was a rabbi at Ava Kesset, was one of our counselors. Dov Peretz Elkin, who was also a rabbi. I think he was also at, he may have been at the Jewish Center, I'm not sure. Jack Hand, who is an attorney, his son's still involved in politics today. Sidney Lefkowitz, well, I mentioned him. Charles McGehee, who was a longtime pastor of the Unitarian Church. Bob Ragland, who was involved in things in Riverside, and he also was a child psychiatrist. And he rode his bicycle around Riverside, and he had a license plate on the back of his bicycle that said, "Another Mother for Peace." He was real involved in the peace movement. There was a librarian, Elizabeth Teague, who even before we formed, noticed when young women came in looking for special books, certain books, she realized that they were trying to figure out what to do about a pregnancy, and she steered them to certain books. And after we formed, she put bookmarks in all of these books with our phone number, and continued to do that for years, never gotten any trouble for it.
Wow.
But this group of people, what we did, it just sort of fell together. It wasn't hard. We set up a schedule. Well, first of all, we incorporated, and by 1970, we were a nonprofit corporation. We got our 501c3 from the government. And like I said, there were almost 40 individuals that were counselors. We put 3 on duty each week. So if you agreed to do this, you only had to do it for 1 week. And with 40 people, I think we were able to go almost 2 months. So you didn't have to do this very often. And nobody remembers this, but in 1970, there were no answering machines, commercial ones. You had to rent it from the phone company for $30 a month. And
Wow.
our recording device, our answering machine, ended up in a closet at First Presbyterian Church. And we decided it wasn't too good to be in a private home. It wouldn't, and that put a burden on one person to maintain it. And it just so happened that the minister of Christian education was a woman named Martha May Holman, and she was the voice of the answering service. And every Monday morning, she went in and put the 3 clergy that were going to be on duty until the next Monday on there with their phone numbers. And we tried to choose 3 clergy that were kind of spread out over the city so that people could find somebody close to them. And they were given the phone number. They could call anybody they wanted, or the one that was most convenient, make an appointment. And we had 3 basic rules. First of all, we never charged for what we did. Secondly, we really worked to be good counselors and help the woman decide what she wanted to do. And we wouldn't make a referral if the woman was ambivalent about it. So, we couldn't be accused of recruiting for clinics or anything. For the first 6 months, we had to look at either, I don't know how to call it. There were people that did abortion that were doing illegal abortions, but they were medically safe. And one of the things that National CCS did was to inspect clinics, to talk to patients. And we would only refer to people that were medically qualified, medically safe, that cared about women, treated them well. And they even began, because Howard had been doing this, and Howard Moody had been doing this in New York since '67. They had learned how to go to somebody that performed these abortions and say, look, let us inspect what you do, and we'll refer everybody in this area or from wherever, you'll be on our list. And so a lot of them lowered their prices, because that was one of the things. To get a nice, safe, clean abortion in New York City, in a Park Avenue hotel room with a real doctor and nurses, cost $1,000. By the time we started, Howard started doing this, they had gotten doctors down to $200 for a medically safe abortion. We, I think, actually sent 1 or 2 people to Puerto Rico, but real quickly in 1971 or 1970, in July 1970, abortion was legal in New York City. So we sent everybody to New York. And clergy consultation, it was a zoo up there, because all kinds of people went into business, and there were abortion counselors for $50 or $100 would get you to a doctor, and there was no laws restricting that. And clergy consultation in New York tried to put them out of business by offering the same service for free and sending them to the best qualified physicians. And so we had an easy access. All of the people that we saw in 1971, the first 9 months, I was kind of a nut about statistics, and we did a demographic survey. We saw 172 women from January 1st to September 30th in 1971. 13 of them were under the age of 16, 5 were over 35, and most of them were between 18 and 34. There were about 136 between 18 and 34. We saw no Black women, only white women. No, wait a minute, that's bad typing. There were 8 Black women and 164 white women. And the gestation period was, some of them were real early, 4 to 8 weeks were 49, 8 to 10 weeks, 64, 10 to 12 weeks, 25, over 16 weeks, 12 to 16 weeks, 15, and 22 to 24 weeks, there were only 2. Most of them were not married, but 35 were. And it was interesting that we had 3 Jews, 21 Catholic, 11 that were other 21 Catholics and 137 Protestants. And I checked out the statistics in Jacksonville at that time, and that pretty much represented the population of Jacksonville. The same number of Catholic women came to see us as represented the percentage of Catholics in the community. And most of them had not used contraception, but some of them had, and it had failed. Almost all of them lived in Jacksonville. A few were outside of Jacksonville, Florida, and 4 from other states, maybe Georgia. And of the 172 women, 120 got a DNC abortion, 41 saline abortion, 3 decided to give up a child for adoption, 6 decided to keep the child, and 2 had miscarriages. So we were kind of proud of the fact that we were not what people called an abortion mill. We weren't recruiting patients for clinics. We after Roe v. Wade, which was in July, or it was January, when I wrote it down, what was Roe v. Wade? 73, yes. By Roe v. Wade, we had done 1,500 referrals. And in 73, we had, after Roe v. Wade, we formed the Women's Center for Reproductive Health. Dr. Max Suter was kind of the dean of the gynecologists in Jacksonville. He was very well respected. He wore Hawaiian shirts. He put women much at ease when he treated them. I've known women that he was their doctor and they loved him. And he's the one that came in when we recruited clergy and gave us lessons about sex, about abortion. He had his little plastic pelvis with a vagina and cervix and all of that. And he demonstrated how the abortions were done. And for maybe some of the men, the first time they ever had an idea what a woman looked like. And he was very closely worked with us in setting standards and such. And after Roe v. Wade, he and Marvin got together and formed the Women's Center for Reproductive Health, which eventually, I think after he died, it was named the Max Suter Center. And it operated for about 20 years. And they did, I was reading one of the things about in the 20th anniversary, they had performed over $300,000 in charity cases. Howard Moody had started working with a doctor in New York who, before Roe v. Wade, and he was willing to do charity cases and charge nothing. They picked a low price and then they did lower and lower. And he said, and I'll do it for nothing. And Howard said, no, that takes the dignity away from the women. They should pay at least $25. I mean, and that was kind of the thought is you're helping women in a very challenging time of need. And we needed to do everything we could to help preserve her dignity and her worth. And but in spite of that, we still did $300,000 in charity work. So I'll answer questions.
Hey, Christopher, we have a question from one of our members, Susan. She wants to know, how did the Reverend's faith give him strength to help women? We hear so much about religions taking women's rights away. Did your religion lead you on a civil rights path?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I marched in the 60s when I was at seminary for Martin Luther King and stuff. And when I was at seminary, I knew 2 different women who had had abortions. And I discovered through knowing them that in St. Louis, and apparently this was well known throughout the South, because one woman had graduated from Emory pregnant and came to St. Louis and got an abortion. It's in the phone book called Midwife. And there was a whole section of midwives, and they were not midwives the way we were trained to think of them. They provided abortions. And both of those women went to doctors afterwards to say, and the doctor said it was fine, you know, they were, but the cost in the mid 60s for an abortion like that was $500 or $600, which I don't know, today would be well over $1,000, maybe $1,500 in today's dollars, but it wasn't cheap and it was difficult. And I was talking to Sandy this morning. She said, and you've got to remind people, and of course, Toni's done this very well, that it was a shameful thing to have an abortion. I mean, even if you had all the right reasons in the world, it was, you didn't tell your friends, or very many of them. And you certainly didn't wear a badge, a pin that said, I've had an abortion. I can't ask women to do this, but I think if every woman that had had an abortion had a gold pin that she wore, and people could see how common it was, it would change a lot of minds. I didn't answer the question, did I? Yes, but I'd had some good counseling courses too. And, you know, in counseling, in good counseling, you don't impose your values on somebody else. And family systems, we call that borrowed values, where, you know, well, my mother wouldn't do it and my grandmother wouldn't do it, so I can't do it. We have to develop our own values. And the thing that I finally focused on, if I had to defend what I did, was the maternal mortality rate. And the Guttmacher Institute, which has studied this for years, and I haven't looked at it recently and I don't remember the facts, but if you go back and look at pre-Roe v. Wade maternal mortality rates, and then post-Roe v. Wade, a significant hundreds of thousands fewer maternal mortality. Maternal mortality almost always picks up, well, it picks up maternal deaths in giving birth, but they're almost always connected to abortions. And so, you know, those bad abortions get recorded as a maternal death. And it, you know, hundreds of thousands of women are alive today because they didn't have an illegal, unsafe abortion.
Hey, Christopher, I want to pick up on something that I heard both of you talk about with this shaming, you know, and keeping everything in secret, not being able to share or really get help from others. There's a woman here locally who regularly, she protests outside one of our choice clinics where people are able to get a number of services to include abortion care. And she tells this horrible story about the fact that she's involved in the work to stop legal abortion because she had an abortion and she was by herself for days, and how it impacted her emotionally, psychologically for a number of years, to include now. And, you know, Toni, I heard you say, you know, you got this care, then you went on to have an accident, an auto accident, and then having to come back and being in scalding hot water. But it really does sound like that when we get not just abortion care, not just the physical medical procedure, but when we get true care, that we are making a very tough decision, a very tough medical decision, regardless of our religious beliefs or our relationships with our families. It sounds like there's a lot of benefit to actually having supportive services and follow-up care that really help us, not just, medically, physically afterwards, but really help the soul.
Well, I'd say to that woman, your experience is a good argument for having legal, safe abortions. I mean, you obviously were mistreated and maltreated, and that's the best argument there is to change that system. But some people get locked into their own narrative and have a hard time thinking their way through it.
When a number of years ago, because this has been a contentious issue, whether it's legalized or not, as we all know, there was a young woman, and she created a t-shirt, and on the t-shirt it just simply said, "I had an abortion," and she was selling them. So I bought one of those shirts, and a lot of times when I give my talk, I wear this shirt that says I had an abortion. I think that you're right. It would be really fabulous if more women would just tell their stories, the stories of their abortions, good, bad, or indifferent. There's stories about when it was illegal. There's stories about when it was legal. People still have stories to tell about that. And it was, when it was legal in the States, it wasn't legal for everybody. It was just, it wasn't legal for women in the military, for instance. So yeah, I think women have, and I remember being on a TV show, a talk show here locally in St. Petersburg, Florida. And, it was like for and against abortion. And the people that were against abortion, that's when they were just starting to say, oh, there are women who regret abortion. I never, ever met a woman who regretted having an abortion, legal or otherwise. If she survived, she did it because she needed to do it for herself, and she was never sorry. But then they just started with this is wrong and you should feel shame, and so they've laid that shame on women that didn't feel that initially.
And the other thing that I think is so important is that I can't think of anything that a man faces, a situation where he's got to make a decision that is as dreadful as a woman who is pregnant and doesn't want to be. I mean, we never, I don't know any situation that I've ever been in or could be in that would help me feel that desperate. And I've known women that have felt that desperation, and it's obvious that they need care and compassion. And men don't get it. I mean, some of us do, but not naturally.
Right.
Christopher, I wanted to ask about something you said during your statistics. You talked about such a small number of African-American or Black women. And I can't help but wonder, you were talking about how women came by the information, the referrals, the phone numbers, and the library, and that we would have still been in a very newly post-civil rights segregated society here, even still in Jacksonville. So I wonder if any of that had anything to do with the small number of African-American women that you might have encountered.
Well, we went to we had different social agencies, we had school teachers, we had, I do think that in the Black community, and this is the whole history of Planned Parenthood and birth control and all that stuff. Sanger was a eugenicist. I mean, she really eugenics, and Planned Parenthood acknowledges that, but they don't talk about it. And I think that there was always a feeling among some Black folks that this was an attempt to decrease their numbers. And it wasn't something that white people could talk about. I mean, we can't tell them you need to do this, or this has to come from the community itself. Now, I know that there are progressive successful Black women who wouldn't hesitate to have an abortion. But I think there's some social pressure against it in the Black community.
Well, I want to say though that there may be, but I don't necessarily think that there is. I think that Black women just have a harder time accessing abortion. Look at the Hyde Amendment. I mean, they passed that the government could not help pay for abortion. And even today, regardless of abortion, there's a high maternity death rate among Black women.
Yes.
Even today, even legal care, they can't get the proper care. And the other thing that's important for us to talk about is that the Catholic Church is, in a stealth way, buying out hospitals. In St. Petersburg, in my area, in the Tampa Bay area, it's called Bay Care. And people don't know that the Catholic bishops are in charge of it. And if you go to one of their hospitals, and it's stealth because they don't change the names of the hospitals, they just take them over. The hospitals join because they set it up originally as a consortium, that as a consortium, they could buy things for a lot cheaper. In St. Petersburg, Bayfront was a public hospital, and it was built on public land. And the CEO joined Baycare, but nobody was really too much aware of that. But we had a chapter member of Pinellas Now who came to one of our meetings and said that her doctor had called her and told her that he had been called up in front of an ethics board at the hospital, which was the person in charge of this ethics board was a Catholic nun. And this is before we knew anything about Baycare or what was going on with the Catholic Church here locally, and called up because our chapter member had had a therapeutic abortion, and abortion was legal at that time, and he had to justify. They had her records, and all of these people who were on this ethics committee of the hospital were made aware of the fact that she had the abortion. They questioned him about why he would do that, and he called to let her know. So we had a meeting, and I was the Florida Now president at that time and lived here locally. And one of our attorneys, Marcia Cohen, decided to take the case, and we sued to get the hospital removed from Baycare. And to this day, it's the only hospital we won. We won the case, and the Catholic diocese here had to pay for all of the fees, Marcia's fees, and pay her. But the reason we won is that the hospital had a 100-year lease for their building to be on. It was the city of St. Petersburg property that they built this public hospital on. And when they signed the original contract, it said that they could not discriminate based on sex, race, and so on. And so that's why we won the case, because they were discriminating against women. And even today, people don't know that when you check into one of those hospitals or those facilities, they do not provide reproductive health care to women. They won't provide birth control. They won't allow for abortions, no matter the situation. And this was before they made abortion illegal in the country nationwide.
I will tell you that's quite disconcerting. I'm considering the number of different religious views when it comes to stem cell research, transplants, and transfusions, a number of things that could impact a person's care, and you wouldn't even know it. I'm going into a hospital, so okay, now you gave me a little scare factor there, Toni. So Toni, we have one last question. It says, please address the comment about saccharine eugenics. Has the Supreme Court ever overruled their ruling about forced sterilization?
Not that I'm aware of.
I don't know. I mean, it doesn't happen very often. And I think that in most states, it's against the law.
Yeah, but it is happening. I mean, we just did a program. There was a documentary that was released in the California prison system where they are sterilizing women without their knowledge and without their consent. So that is, and in the detention centers right now
For
across this
immigrants.
country,
Yeah.
well, maybe not under Biden, they were performing sterilizations and hysterectomies that were unnecessary on immigrant women without their knowledge or consent. So that is still ongoing. I want to just say this one thing about the Catholic healthcare system. They've taken over like 35 hospitals, and they're not just St. John's and St. Joseph's or whatever. It's Morton Plant Hospital. It is just Meese Hospital, Dunedin Hospital. They keep those names so people don't know that they've been taken over by healthcare, the Catholics. And Bay Care has become really large here, but people don't know that Bay Care is run by the Catholics.
Is the same true with the prisons? Because so many of our prisons are now operated privately.
Right.
So are they being operated by some organization that perhaps has another motive?
I don't know. There was a film that we showed here in the state of Florida to our chapters, a documentary film that exposed all of this, and they've passed a law now in California to stop it. But this is pretty recent. I'm not talking about in the old days. I'm talking about just a few years ago, the documentary came out and they worked to stop it.
What's the name of that, if you don't mind?
I don't know. You know what? As you talk, I can't remember, but I'll look it up right now and let you know what it is.
I have to say one thing in defense of some Catholics. My brother was mentally handicapped. We called him retarded. I know that's not acceptable now, but when he was born in 1943, that was the term. And when he was in his 70s, he had some heart problems. And the cardiologist and I talked about it and decided that he was not appropriate for surgery. And because to be in a hospital, he had to be strapped down because he would pull things out, and it didn't work even when he had to be in a hospital. So a voluntary surgery was just out of the question. So I went to his physician, his primary care doctor, and in Illinois, they had an end of life thing to say, do not resuscitate a DNR. It was something different. And I made an appointment with this doctor. We talked about it, and he signed this. And I said, is this a problem for you? He says, no, the nuns make us do this. He said, it was a Franciscan hospital, and the nuns insisted that they do end of life care and planning like that. And I thought, wow, I have never heard of that before. So there are some that are a more advanced thinking, maybe not with reproductive health yet, but
we have, and many now members are Catholic, so
Yeah.
there are the statistics. Many Catholic women have abortion,
right.
and use birth control. So I just had another experience. My partner was taken to, his doctor insisted that he go to St. Anthony's for exploratory procedure, and I was in the waiting room, and I went to use the restroom, and there was this great big red stop sign on the door of the restroom, and the restroom door was locked, and you had to go to the reception area, and you had to get the key, and you had to allow them to take a urinary test for you to use the bathroom as a person that is just in the waiting room waiting for somebody right now today. I mean, I took a picture of it and I sent it around to everybody.
What did they want it for? What did they do with it?
You can imagine. It was just like insanity. I did not go to the restroom. I just
should have peed on the floor.
I just didn't do it. I held.
All right, we're getting ready to wrap this up. Toni, I want to know if you were able to find the title of that documentary.
I put it in the chat. It was called
The Belly of the Beast.
Yeah.
bellyofthebeastfilm.com if anybody would like to check that out. So
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I would encourage everyone to check that out. Yeah, so I just want to say thank you very much to both of our guest speakers today. Thank you for giving us a glimpse into what things were like that many of us may not have been aware of. I appreciate the work that you've both done, and I hope that we don't need some of those services again in our not too distant future. Things have not gone well for us at the Supreme Court and certainly here in the state of Florida. But we really do hope that people will really feel empowered to speak out, to tell their own stories. I know our own local chapter of the National Organization for Women did some storytelling, and they asked people to submit articles which they shared, and those were pretty powerful. Sometimes, you know, we have opinions that we arrive at when we've not really had another person's lived experience. But when you can hear the humanity behind these stories and the challenges and the barriers that people face, I think sometimes it can help us to arrive at a different opinion, or at least say, I should not be making decisions on behalf of another person. So I thank you both for joining us today and for sharing your personal stories. And also want to thank Laura Strickland, our speaker series director, for bringing you both here to join us today and sharing that. And now we're going to move into just a little bit of league information. If you all will bear with me just a moment, I'm going to screen share because there's a lot of stuff going on. And I mean a lot of stuff. We have been very busy and we continue to be very busy here in Jacksonville. There we go. So just to bring everybody up to speed, this Thursday night, we will actually be at the Mount Olive Primitive Baptist Church with a group called We Draw the Lines. Some of you may or may not be aware that the League of Women Voters for the state of Florida is engaged in a lawsuit against the Secretary of State, now Cord Byrd, as well as the Florida House and the Florida Senate. And this has to do with the congressional maps that have been drawn here in the state of Florida that were gifted to us by Governor DeSantis. So we'll be there with them, educating people about the fact that this fight is not over. We are still litigating in court, and we just want to educate the public so they will join us in this work to protect the voice of voters here in the state of Florida. This Saturday, we're going to be with our transgender community members at Transform the Vote. This is a national campaign that they are leading, and we'll be doing voter registration here. That's going to be at the Jesse Ball DuPont Center down on Adams Street. So we're doing voter registration and also voter education with that group, and we're excited to be with them. Just a reminder that voter registration does end on the 11th, and a reminder that the 10th is a holiday. So anyone doing voter registration in person, as far as collecting applications, you need to make sure you get those to your county supervisor of elections office before close of business on the 11th. Now, the great option there would be to do online voter registration if you're assisting folks, because that will actually be automatic and won't require the processing of applications. The deadline to request a vote by mail ballot is going to be the 29th of October. And then we highly encourage you, if you're going to use vote by mail, to return it very early on if you're going to use the U.S. Postal Service. However, if you're able to take it to an early voting site and turn it in there at a secure intake station, we would highly recommend you do that. And then the last option would be to take it to the supervisor of elections office on the day of election. And we heard horror stories about St. Johns County and other counties where the supervisor of elections received vote by mail ballots the day after the election, and they have no value. Your vote did not count. So please make every effort to get that ballot returned to the supervisor of elections so that it can be counted. And when you do vote by mail, please use the My Voter status so you can track your ballot, make sure it's received. And if you don't see that it's been received, you need to contact your supervisor of election and find out how you can rectify that situation. We may be having an opportunity to do what that is called vote by mail chasing. We're working with an organization right now that is going to be coming to Jacksonville on October 19th and 22nd. It's in-person phone banking to actually contact people in our county who requested a vote by mail ballot and have not yet returned it. So more to come via email on that opportunity. Our education committee, I saw our director, Linda Mann, is with us today. Her meeting coming up is going to be on the 20th at 11 o'clock. It is, though, regularly scheduled the third Thursday of each month. If you're interested in doing work with our education committee, we would highly encourage you to reach out to Linda so she can take advantage of your talent and your services and get you involved. And we are going to have another speaker series event this month. It is going to be a representative from the Duval Supervisor of Elections, Mr. Robert Phillips, who is actually the Chief Elections Officer. He's going to talk to us about the last election, the upcoming election, things that we may be concerned about, things that we want to know about. So we'll be doing that via Zoom, and that registration link is going to be coming out to you soon via email. Also, the League of Women Voters across the nation has been supporting 10 million more Black Voters Matter. And they're going to be bringing a caravan that's been traveling the East Coast. It'll arrive in Jacksonville on the 21st of October at 11 a.m. over at the St. Stephen AME Church. More to come via our newsletter and email about that. But we're joining a number of organizations, to include some librarians who are part of the Unban the Book tour. They're going to be providing books that have been banned in different states. They're going to be providing copies of those books in our local community. So we're always excited to see librarians come to town, especially when they bring us things that other people think we should not know about or should not read. We love our librarians. We are going to have an in-person dinner. That's going to be November 13th at 5 p.m. out at UNF. If anybody remembers who was around back in February of 2019 before the pandemic shut everything down, that was our last big formal event. We had a great time together, and we really anticipate having a great time together again. So we're going to recognize the work of a lot of our members here in our own chapter, and really an opportunity just to, lay eyes on each other and be together and break bread. So we're looking forward to the appreciation dinner. Legal orientation was initially scheduled for the weekend that we're now doing our membership appreciation dinner. So we are going to be rescheduling that, and we will put that on our social media. It'll come out in email, newsletter, and it'll also be on our website. Our healthcare committee, which is headed up by Wendy Snee, meets the first Tuesday of each month. I think her next meeting is November 7th. If you are interested in participating in our healthcare committee, please reach out to Wendy. If you don't have her direct information, please let us know, and we will put you in touch with Wendy. But she's been doing some good work working with our Department of Health and others in our community. And lastly, we are doing a lot of voter registration events here in our 4 counties. However, we can't do it without people who are trained and certified to do voter registration. We would highly encourage all of our members to attend the online training, which is mandatory with the League of Women Voters, and then reach out to Rona DiCamillo, who is our voter registration director, so that she can get you matched up with some seasoned and experienced voter registration members, and we can get you trained to do voter registration. I'm telling you, we've got a lot of requests, but we can only say yes when we have people who are certified, trained, and who are actually available to do that work. So we would ask that everyone consider participating in the training. And just a couple of other things, as I said, voter registration, we always need help. For those of you who have not checked out our vote411.org online nonpartisan voter guide, we would encourage you to do that. That comes to you by a small group of members who do volunteer work to establish those questions, make phone calls to our candidates to participate. But there's a lot of great information on there, and you can find it just as easy as putting in your address, and it'll tell you what races are going on and who the candidates are. Also, Amy Mitchell, she takes care of our newsletter every month, always looking for folks to help us generate content as well as do online editing. And anything that you see on any social media, to include LinkedIn, actually comes from Deb Miller, our Director of Technology. So she runs social media, our website. And then where are we at? Committee membership. If anyone is interested in joining any of our committees, or if you're interested in joining our board in the future, we would encourage you to reach out to any director, board member, or myself. And candidate forums, you may have noticed that we did not hold any candidate forums during the midterm elections. We had some folks who were interested in volunteering, but we didn't find enough folks who were interested in leading it and actually help us get that off the ground. Again, we can only say yes to projects when we have members who are interested and who are willing to step forward. So we're all volunteer organizations, so people say yes when they can and they say no when they must, and we're respectful of that. So please know that we want to do more, but we can only do it with the help of our members. If you're attending today and you're not a member, we would encourage you to join. And if you are a member and you're interested in getting involved in some way, even in ways that I didn't talk about today, we would encourage you to reach out to us so we can get you connected to the work, whether it's at the local level, the state level, or at the national level. And these are the places that you can find us: LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and on our website, LWVJFC.org. And having said that, I realize it's a gorgeous day out today, even though it's a little cooler than it was a week ago. So I really do appreciate everyone joining us today, taking time out of your busy day to hear some very pertinent information. It's, stories of days ago, but unfortunately it's a struggle that we're still having to deal with today. So for those folks who are observing Yom Kippur, I hope you have an easy and a meaningful fast. And with that, I say thank you all for being here and have a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.